Hey everybody, this is Brant Brinkeroff from Aesc Games, the creator and designer of Oros, and this is our very first AMA, and I'm super excited to be here. We got all sorts of great questions, and I've tried to organize them as best as I possibly could to make it so our conversation here will flow. But thank you everybody for throwing out questions. And so without further ado, let's dive in and answer some of these things. So our first question is, what does Oros mean? That's an excellent question. Oros is Greek for mountain. So simple as that, it means mountain. But it's also the root term that scientists use to describe the process through which mountains are formed, which is orogenesis, or the mountain and the origin of, right? So it's how mountains are formed. And so what happens are, two large land masses collide together and they buckle and they form these massive mountains. And throughout our cultural history, our human history, mountains have always had this really special place within cultures and within religions. And so thematically, it all kind of fit together. So since Oros was a unique name, it's kind of unique in the space. No one else is using it. There's no other games out there that's called the Oros. It worked on so many different levels. So that's why I chose the name, and that's what it means. All right, next question. How do you pronounce Asch? Okay, so this is in reference to the company name, Aesc Games, which is AESC. So a lot of people, they see that and they say AESC because it's an uncommon, it's a very unusual word. Asch is actually a typographic ligature that represents the diphthong AE. So that's our letter A, right? AE is the diphthong. And so the Asch character, which is the letter A and the letter E, that's a ligature, means that they're joined together. They're joined together along their common stem. That's the Asch character. The character is still used in a number of languages all over the world. But I believe that the origin is from the original Germanic languages of Elder Futhark, where all that really begins. But I'm kind of a type nerd. I have background in graphic design and typography, and so picking something like a typographic character to represent my brand kind of fit me, as well as just the idea of things coming and joining together. And so anyway. Asch, that's how you pronounce it. There you go. Next question. How long ago did you come up with the idea for Oros? That's a good question. The game started 4 or 5 years ago. And I actually didn't start the game. A neighbor of mine who was also a game design enthusiast had actually started the game. It was in a very rudimentary form, but he would come over and he would show me different game designs he was working on. We'd play test them, talk through them. And one day he brought over a map that had tiles. And basically the concept of the game was, I would shift a row of tiles and I would try to create some big Pangea-esque landscape, and then the next player would shift a row tiles, and they'd shift a row tiles, and that was basically all that the game was. But as he was showing me, this concept of a flat map and stuff moving around, my mind was blown, and I spent literally all night, just writing down notes and all sorts of ideas. Pages and scribblings and drawings and sketches and all sorts of things. And the next day kind of ran up to him like, Charles, what if it did this? What if it did this? What if there was collisions? What if there were volcanoes? What if there was eruptions? What if there were chain reactions? What if there are earthquakes? What if there are people living on this landscape and they're like, what's going on? And they're trying to survive. What if all of this stuff was happening all at once? And, I don't know if he was just like, whoa, or like, wow. But he said, hey, if you can make this into a game, go take it. I want to see what happens. And so that's really where all of this started. It started as just like a plate tectonic mechanic that really inspired a whole genesis. And this whole journey that I've taken and turning into a really robust and a rich thematic game with Euro roots, but also with these really unique and interesting ideas. So anyway, that's where all of this is coming from. All right, next question. How quickly did you arrive at the mechanics that drive the game, specifically the way the board is tile-based and constantly shifting? Okay, so much like what I just said, that's actually where the game started. That is the bones of the game, right? And as I went through the process of designing and developing and pushing new ideas into it, anytime where that heart of the plate tectonic movement was starting to get lost, we had to pull it back in, because I felt like it was such a unique thing, and it was such a delightful thing. It was the thing that usually would capture people's attention and would capture their imaginations. And so made sure that was the heart. That was the heart of the game, and then built everything else around it. Okay, next question. I already know this is your first game and that you are a graphic designer. What other background details can you share that have led you to designing Oros? Oh, that's good. So I am a graphic designer. I've worked for 15 years at different agencies, doing all sorts of work. Not just doing graphic design, but also doing user experience design, creative strategy, a lot of the thinking that goes behind the visuals as well as the visuals themselves. And I've also, I kind of dabble in all sorts of visual things like different animations and illustration work, photographic work. And so I kind of have this really broad skill set. So that definitely shows and shines through in the way that the game has ended up, where it is today. But there's also, I think, a big part of me that's been put into the game through the theme, the anthropological side of the game. So I have a really interest in ancient documents, ancient scripture, ancient cultures. And so I've read a lot of different things, from Dead Sea Scroll documents and pseudographic documents, Gnostic works, all sorts of things, and kind of been very interested for a very long time about how these universal themes that seem to permeate across cultures across the globe, and themes that just keep reemerging, and things that really connect cultures that you'd think are completely separate, that had no influence on each other, but yet they still have these common threads that bind them together, and common origins. And that's always been super fascinating to me. And so thematically, I think that personal interest of mine has spilled right into the game, because that's a lot of what the theme is it's about the genesis of our culture, our human story, our collective human story, I guess I could say it that way. And how, especially when it comes to mountains and just mankind's ancient obsession with mountains and its association with spirituality or transcendence, or being close to a deity, or having a higher knowledge or greater power, which leads to greater power. And so a lot of these really interesting ideas that are always just kind of like turning around in my head are just, you can definitely find them all over the place as you're playing the game. All right, next question. What inspired your idea for the theme? Well, I kind of spoke a little bit to that. But like I said, the game started out to be just a geologic kind of a driven game, and it didn't really have the layers of theme on top of it. And that has been a long process to develop. It went through phases where, like I said, you were little tribes of people just trying to survive on this crazy continent. You're trying to get mountains to stay safe, and it's gone through different maybe your kingdoms, and you're trying to conquer or be better than each other. And when it came down to it, though, the theme of the game really isn't about conquering other people. And I felt like we have a lot of those types of games. We have a lot of games where you're at war and you're trying to beat your enemy, or you're trying to be better than someone else, or you're trying to rise to the top, to be the greatest of them all. And something that ties back to the theme where I landed on is that it's not really about you conquering. It's really more altruistic, right? It's about sharing knowledge. It's about giving knowledge. And throughout the game, as you build sacred sites on mountains, each one you build is another opportunity for someone else to build, where they can build on your work to get greater knowledge, and then another can come and build on their work to get even greater knowledge. And you can share that knowledge by being there on your sacred sites when others are building. And so it's more of a sharing knowledge theme. What we're trying to do is elevate all of the people, all of the followers in a way to a greater and a higher knowledge. So there you go. Anyway, a lot on the theme. Let's move on. Let's see what's next. Were you able to resist creating any graphics while you worked out fully how the game would function? No, not at all. Not at all. As a graphic designer, I'm a visual thinker. And even though working through the mechanics side of the game is so essential and it would take up a lot of time, there also it was like bursts, right? I'd be working on mechanic things, and then you have to play test it to make sure they'll work. And so there was these periods of time where you're not working on mechanic things. And so during those off times, I was illustrating and drawing and trying to make it more visually interesting. And so a lot of the artwork was being developed at the same time that the game mechanics were being developed, at least rudimentary forms of it. And I did that because that's just what I know how to do, and it's something that I enjoy doing. So, but I also feel like the graphic side of prototype making is really important, because if you think of it, the graphics of a game inform a player about what they're doing, how they do it, and what the outcome might be when they do it. And so the graphics, they may not be in written word, but they are very informative and they're very important. And so the fewer the graphics, the more stuff that your players have to remember. And so having some of those things already developed and have them incorporated in the playtesting, I think helped develop the game in ways that were more realistic, but it also made it faster, right? Because people didn't have to dwell on like, oh, I sure wish I could remember this or that thing. And you're like, no, well, I've already taken care of that. So let's move on to the next thing, right? Something that's deeper or a little bit more important, or something that needs to be fixed or refined. And so, yeah, no, I couldn't resist it. It was all visual the whole time, the whole way through. All right, next question. How many revisions did the player mats encounter as a result of refining the demigods' ability and engine building aspect? Oh, that's good. Okay, so the game originally didn't have anything like player mats or anything like that, right? It was just I shift, you shift. And then I developed it into a card game, actually. So it was all card driven. It was like a draw a card, play a card type of thing. And there were different powers on the cards. And it was like that for 2 or 3 years, where the whole game was being developed around a card set. And during a lot of play tests, a lot of people would ask, why cards? I even actually had Peter Hayward, the illustrative Peter Hayward, played the game. He demoed it, and that was one of his first questions. Why cards? And so I had worked through a few player mat possibilities, and it never really clicked. It never really worked. It never really felt like it was integrated. And so I kind of abandoned the idea. And it stayed like that until a friend of mine, Chandler Copenhagen, had played it with some other game designers. And they brought it up again. Why cards? Why are cards driving this game? And Chandler came back and said, I really think that a player mat can work. And I was like, I've done a lot of player mats. I've tried a number of different things. I've just never found a way for it to work. He said, no, think of it more like an economy, where you have smaller powers. And then as the game progresses, you get stronger and stronger and more capable in those powers. And just that alone, it was like, again, one of those little moments. There's a light bulb. It was like, poof, and immediately in my head, poof, there was a player mat. I knew exactly what to do. All those old explorations just slid together and locked into place. I knew exactly how this thing needed to work. And that night, I made one. The next morning, the next day, I play tested it, and I played it with a bunch of people. And so from that version, which was originally black and white and just really rough, I think we're on version 16 now. So it's taken quite a while, quite a few revisions to really dial it in. So everything is extremely balanced, and the economy also is extremely balanced across the entire game, and your different options on how you can improve things across your player mat. So it's taken some time, but that change to the player mat system was fantastic. As soon as we played it the first time, we're like, yep, that's the way that should have been the whole time. Oh, play testers were right. But anyway, that's the genesis of that. Next question. Will there be a P&P tier for the Kickstarter? I do plan on having a P&P as part of the Kickstarter. I actually have some fun plans for it. At least I think they're fun. Hopefully other people think it's fun. But yes, I do plan on having a P&P as part of the Kickstarter. Do you already have in mind expansions for Oros, especially ones that add variability and asymmetry to the game? Okay. Well, let's deal with variability and asymmetry. So variability, of course, the Automa systems bring in a lot of variability, right? Because you shuffle that thing, you never know really how they're coming or where they're coming. You kind of know how they're balanced, but you don't know the order that they're coming. So that adds variability to the game. But there are a number of different ways that you can add variability into the game. For example, just like different ways to set up the tiles around the map. On the small map, there are 56 land units that are on the map itself, and then there are 8 volcano units. For the large map, there's also 56 land units, but there are 12 volcano units to start the game. And really, as long as you keep those numbers the same, it really honestly doesn't matter too much how you set up the map. As long as, I guess the other criteria is each of the quadrants needs to be balanced, right? You can't have like one person starting next to all the tiles and the others having to start somewhere else. But as long as you kind of have those numbers in play, there's a lot of different ways you can set up the map. Maybe I'll actually put together some examples of alternate map starting setup scenarios, post them on BGG or something like that, because that's one way to add variability into the game. But honestly, when it comes to it, a lot of people, that's not really a concern. One different decision in the game has a butterfly effect across the whole rest of the game. And so the likelihood that anybody would actually play the exact same game is so small. I mean, that's minuscule. Like, I don't even know how that would happen, because all it takes is one action being different and all of the opportunities across the map change. So most people aren't really asking about it, but there's variability. Asymmetry is another thing that comes up often, because each of the players plays as a demigod and they have a little theme, right? There's a demigod of the raging water or the great waters or the raging fire or something like that. And they say, oh, there's player personalities. Do they have asymmetric powers? And the answer is yes, but not in the conventional way. Much like many of the mechanics and the gameplay of Oros, it's unconventional. When it comes to asymmetry, this game is asymmetric. It just doesn't start asymmetric. And that's where people are like, oh, I got to take some time to wrap my head around this. But it's asymmetry in at least the way that I think, the best way possible. Because I kind of don't like those games where the designer has said, well, you have to have this asymmetric thing and you get to have that asymmetric thing. And it's all predefined and predetermined by someone else. In Oros, the asymmetry comes into play, and it's all developed by the player themselves. Because as you play the game, you get to choose how you invest your wisdom. And that wisdom becomes asymmetric very quickly, usually within 2 or 3 times around the table. Everybody is now asymmetric in some way or another, but the player got to choose it. It didn't require me to have to dictate that. Another issue that comes up with adding just asymmetry on top of a game is the balance. And you see so many games that they go through the same thing. People say, hey, you should have asymmetry. And so they add it in and the game's no longer balanced, because if the game didn't start asymmetric, right? If it's not part of the core of the game, you're always going to be fighting how to keep that balanced. And so right now, the game absolutely is asymmetric, but it's a player choice. You get to choose how it develops, and I think that's a really cool thing. At least I think it's a super cool thing. Okay, but let's talk about expansions, because there are ideas for expansions that bring in asymmetry, but it's not in that just surface level way of just plopping an ability onto a character. It's more of through a whole different civilization tableau type of concept. So I've got a number of concepts that are rattling around in my brain, plans for expansions, plans for all sorts of fun little things, different expansion modules, different play modes like cooperative, mixy mode, or ally mode type of play style, play modes, hidden objectives, Automa for the large map, all sorts of like bigger expansion ideas. But for right now, putting them off because it is so important for me to have a strong foundation of a game, a base game that is refined, that is elegant, and that is strong, and that's good. And so what I've decided to do, rather than spending the next, deferring making the base game available right now, and deferring that process and just developing expansion after expansion after expansion for the next 2 or 3 years, I said, no, it's way better. Let's get a really strong base game out into the world. Let's get everybody playing it, get a fan base, an audience, and then when we have expansions ready, we're going to have people that are ready to have them and to play them. And so that just makes a whole lot more sense in my mind. So that's my approach with expansion. So in terms of like full-on big expansions, right now they're all being deferred, and I'm focusing 100% to make sure that the base game is the best game. All right, next up, will there be any expansions or mini expansions as stretch goals? All right, so we just talked about expansions, but mini expansions, I cannot confirm nor deny that there might be mini expansions coming up inside the Kickstarter. You're going to have to follow the campaign to find out. All right, next question. Will there be additional aids that help with to help score tracking? Oh, that's interesting. So not really, and mainly because there's not really a need to. The entire game, there's no hidden information at all. And so you can always look around and you can do the math yourself. You can figure out exactly who has what, who's doing what, the way that anybody has invested the wisdom that they've gathered, the way their player mats are set up, the powers that they have, and the way that they're going to score points. It's all open. And so there's not really a reason to try to tally up or keep track of that score while you're playing. You can always glance around and get a feel for it pretty easily. The scoring is also intentionally developed in a way that it doesn't get out of hand or become excessive, right? There's no 167 point scores out of the game. Your average score ranges from mid 40s to about mid to low 60s. And so, it's a very narrow little window, and it's really not a lot that you have to add up, not a lot that you have to keep track of. So there's no really felt like there's a need to have some sort of thing to track your score while you're playing. It's all right at the end, and it's all open anyway. So anyway, there you go. Next question. Will Oros have a plan of adding a 5th player module during the Kickstarter? Okay, so I do have plans for additional players, a 5th and a 6th player, potentially even a 7th character, but not during the Kickstarter. Those, again, are being thought of as future expansions that will bring more player count, a greater player count into the game. But with the way the game's made, usually it's about 30 minutes per player. So there's a little bit of an issue if you add too many players into the game, which is where the Automa system is so fantastic, because the more players you have, the more competitive it is. It's the more interesting the game is. Actually, it becomes more layered because each mountain can only have 3 sacred sites. So as long as you have more than 3 players, somebody's going to be missing out on a mountain, right? And that alone adds competition. And then the more players you have, even more competition, right? That you're trying to get to those mountains before someone else takes it away from you. And so the more players, the more layers. But the more players, the more time. And so the way to solve that is I've developed Automa for each one of the players. And so you could play with 3 of your friends, but you could still add in 3 more players into the game where their turns are able to operate within 10, 15 seconds. So it adds that sense of other players being there, that's facilitating that type of competition without having to have all of the people playing. But you could also play with all the people playing too, and it's fun too. I've tried it before with the 6, and it's a lot of fun. So anyway, but those modules for the 5th, 6th player, those are out in the future. They'll be developed, and I've got there's still more work that I need to make sure that those things that I don't end up misbalancing anything for that type of stuff. But we'll also say this, the ziggurat itself is double-sided. So there's one side that is for 1 to 4 players, but the thing will flip over, and that will be included in the base game during the Kickstarter. It flips over, and there's a larger ziggurat that is used for games with 4 to more players. And so it's a little bit bigger, and it'll help the game be able to scale to be able to have more players in it. But in terms of the characters, they'll be coming later. All right, next. What is the optimal player count? This is a tough question. Because it's different based on who you are and how you play and what you're interested in. So to me, optimal player count, 4 on the large map. And that's just because I've played the game a whole lot, so I know exactly how all the mechanics work. And having that 4th player with the big scale of the large map where you really have to plan. It takes a lot more tactical thinking, a lot more strategy to get things accomplished on that larger map. That is where it's at for me. I love that play. On the flip side, I really like solo. Playing against the 2 Automa, it's such an interesting and engaging challenge. The games are always so different, and you really have to be on your toes the whole time. If you make 1 or 2 mistakes, you're going to lose. And so it's really great for refining your gameplay and figuring out how to think through the types of visual and creative puzzles that the game presents. So I also really like solo, but then 2 to 3 player, if this is the first time you're playing, that's probably actually 2 or 3 player game is probably the optimal player count for the first few times you play the game. What that does is it gives enough people that the game is working and it's engaging, but also you don't have that competition of one player is going to miss out on a mountain opportunity, because each mountain can only hold 3. You have 3 players. Everybody's going to be able to build something. And so it's a little bit easier to learn on. So maybe that's the optimal player count. I don't know. It depends on if this is the first time you're playing, if this is the 100th time you're playing. I think it's more of it might be more about just like, what do you prefer as a player? And that's probably your optimal player count. But I think it works really well. 1 player, 2 player, 3 player, 4 player. The game is rich and engaging no matter what. So there you have that. Next question. What was your most favorite part of the whole process? Oh man. Okay. Well, I mean, I definitely really enjoyed, I've enjoyed designing the game. I had never done this before. This is the very, very first game that I've ever designed, and working through the mechanical problems and finding creative solutions to mechanical problems. Wow, it's super engaging, super fun. But honestly, like in terms of the process, the last few months, I have had the opportunity to play Oros with people all over the world, because I have it up on Tabletopia and it's available for anybody to play. And so when people are like, hey, I'd love to try out your game, we were able to get on and play. So I've gotten to meet so many people that, that love games. They're so enthusiastic, and they're so excited about the game. And we're able to get down and play together, see their face, talk to them, and play the game with them. That's probably been my most favorite part, honestly, is meeting all of these new people and these people all over the world. That whole aspect of it has just been absolutely amazing. So anyway, thanks for everybody who's played with me. If you ever want to play with me, just reach out and let's play. But you can also just jump on and play yourself. I feel like it's really important to have the game available so people can demo it online and say, oh yeah, this is a game that I want to have. This is one that I need in my collection, rather than just making the risk, right? Like, I don't know what I'm getting into, but it looks okay. I think it's really important. So you can demo it, or at least see someone demoing it, watch a video of someone running through it or something like that. So there you go. My most favorite part of the process. And boom, we've hit the end of our questions. All right, everybody. I hope that was good, helpful, interesting, insightful. I don't know, but we're going to do it again next week. We'll have a different topic. And so prep your questions and let's do this again. Until then, keep on playing, and we'll talk later.